Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. We are still getting folks who are coming in to the call. So it's been a while since we've had these group calls. So I'm going to run down the list of folks that are on the call, and I'm going to start giving you all permissions to record the conversations on your all's end. And for those who don't have the option of recording, I will be recording myself as well. And
recording in progress.
So if you have any trouble with your recording, I can always send you the recording that I have on my end. And if you all give me a minute, it's going to take a while to go through here. Okay, does everybody who needs to have permission have permission? If you don't have permission, please let me know and I will give you permissions. Okay, so on the call this afternoon is our Deputy City Manager, Mario D'Agostino. Also on the call is our Assistant Chief Jorge Rodriguez, who is also the Office of Emergency Management Coordinator for the city and the county. And so Chief, there you go. Okay, thank you for turning on your camera. Chief D'Agostino, if you want to go ahead and get us started. And I will, give me a second. I need to give one more person permission. Lianna, did I give you permission yet here?
And Chief Rodriguez is our Emergency Management Coordinator.
Chief Rodriguez, I apologize. It's been a while, y'all. I did give permission. Okay. So Chief D'Agostino, if you want to go ahead and get started, we're going to start with Chief D'Agostino and then Chief Rodriguez, and then we'll open it up to questions. Just as a quick reminder, I will ask you to ask your 2 questions, and then we'll move on to the next individual, and then 2 questions, and we'll go round robin in that direction. And I'll run down the list of participants, so I'll call you all out as we move on to the next person. All right, Chief.
Thank you. And so as everyone knows, Title 42 is going away on May 11th. And so that brings several concerns for the community at large. And that's the overall numbers all at once, how they could overwhelm the feds and both us here locally. So both the processing side while they're in custody, and then once they're released into the community so they can move on their way. Those, the unprocessed, gathering downtown, camping, those areas, that brings us great concern. The lack of sheltering for those that are undocumented. That's definitely a concern that we saw last December. And those are people who've circumvented the process to go through the border, so they don't actually have the permission yet to travel onward. And so that brings a lot of difficulty, especially for municipal government, county government, anyone who's accepting federal funding. You cannot actually house that section of the population. So that's a huge concern on making sure that there are those who can help take care of them as needed. The unsponsored, that's what we saw last September and October, and that came across in the Venezuelan population when we were seeing about 50% at that time that had no means to get to where they were going. So that actually caused us to if you remember through our welcoming center, we actually did the long distance chartering, getting them to those destinations of their choices. And then what we saw a lot of, both of the last surges, but especially the one in December, January, was that airport transportation infrastructure and the sheer number of people who were in the airport and in the backlog to flights, and that creates a longer term housing situation. So with that, our strategies, as we've seen over the past year, it'll involve our migrants welcoming center, our supplemental transportation, and then emergency sheltering. Now, it can be in many different, it doesn't have to be that order, it'd be in different orders depending on what the situation brings at hand. As we know, the county has their welcome processing center, and they're able to manage, up to 1,000. I don't remember if their last number was 1,200, Chief? 1,200. 1,200. So they anticipate being able to process up to 1,200. But what we're hearing from the federal government is we could be seeing more than 1,200 per day entering into El Paso. So those numbers won't be enough. That would cause us to open our welcoming center back up. Our emergency sheltering, as you remember, we went into a contract with El Paso Independent School District. So we still have 2 facilities that we can utilize. Those are being prepped. They're in the standby position right now for when Title 42 goes away and we have to start housing again for response. And then looking at the funding, it's that FEMA Emergency Food and Shelter Grant funding. And so with that, we've asked for a total of just over $40 million, $40.2 million to get us through this calendar year. We have received advanced funding. We are short 14.4 of that number. So the new funding request for advanced funding is at $25.8 million. That's where we're waiting on for that. We have money in the bank right now that we can utilize for this operation. And that's how we're approaching it, is looking at what it's going to entail. And not just transportation here locally, but it's those long distance transports. And it might not be all that same population that was unsponsored. It might be just trying to keep that airport infrastructure, our transportation infrastructure intact. And so a lot of it will be shuttling migrants to the next transportation hub where they can get their connections made from there. Thank you, Lauren.
Thank you, Chief. And Chief Rodriguez, I didn't know if you wanted to add anything and any additional information to what Chief D'Agostino had provided.
No, that about covers it. Those would be our 3 major strategies: the emergency sheltering, the supplemental transportation, and our ability to stand up our welcome center as needed. But no, nothing else.
So with that, I'm going to open it up to questions, and I'm going to start at the top of the list that I see here on my end. It's probably alphabetical. So I'm going to start with A, Favela. Ms. Favela, if you could unmute yourself and ask your first and follow-up. Okay, not seeing that. Alicia Caldwell. Miss Alicia, did you want to go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your first and follow-up?
Yeah, thanks, Laura. I appreciate it. Chief D'Agostino, can you tell us which cities or have you coordinated with cities outside the region, as you said, the sort of transit connectors? And what's the plan to get folks to those transit connectors? Are those cities willing to accept people, and have they set specific limits on how many people they'll accept, be it on a daily basis or sort of writ large?
Chief, you want to take that one?
Sure. Thank you for your question. So we haven't solidified those operations yet. We're still in those conversations. We're working out some of those details. But what we can say is the county has set up a very similar method of moving folks through Houston. And they work with Catholic Charities out of Houston that will charter a bus to El Paso that will pick up passengers from the county's facility. These migrants will have ticketed flights already paid for who will then be chartered overnight back to Houston and will fly out. But we are having conversations with other cities. We're working out those particular details. As soon as we have those and those plans solidified, we'll share that information with you.
Thank you, Chief. And your follow-up, Alicia?
what's the plan if other cities say no? The city of Denver was sort of scrambling. Other cities in Texas will also have theoretically a surge of migrants themselves. Is there a contingent plan, be it Phoenix or elsewhere, even further away from the border? And what cities are you actually talking to, or what state officials are involved at this point? If someone says no, what's the backup plan?
Well, at this point, this is a new strategy that's being employed. So we're trying to see the merits of it and see if that's going to be something that we're going to be able to scale. So it's going to be a feasible operation, but also be able to provide us the impacts to help decompress our region. So that again, these are preliminary plans. So we're still figuring that out. We haven't got to that second point yet on backup, but we know that providing relief for our transportation infrastructure is going to be critical. And if it can't come through flights, then as we've seen previously, we have supplemental transportation via charters.
Thank you, Chief. John Moen from Scripps, go ahead.
Apologies. Yeah. So
Person follow up.
yeah, I've obviously I was in El Paso a couple of weeks ago, and I because of Operation Lone Star, I've noticed that the concertina wires expanded east and west. And if people are desperate, I suspect they're going to try and go towards places like Socorro or even farther in, and then, you know, try to cross there. And I guess my question being is, are you worried about people scrambling across, you know, the main roads and in the way of traffic if they're desperate and things get to that kind of foot traffic trying to cross over the river and into El Paso?
Okay, so with the addition of those tactics, you know, deployed, that's the governor's operation that's doing that. But we have seen a reduction in people crossing the roadway there, that unsafe practice, and so that has changed what we've been seeing here locally. It doesn't change the volume of people coming into El Paso, because the surrounding areas where they're pushing out to, as you described, whether it's southern New Mexico or just farther east of town, they're still part of the El Paso sector. So they're still going to be processed through the same Border Patrol location here locally.
Okay, thank you.
Lianna.
Oh, how are you guys doing today?
Good.
Good. Thank you so much. I have two questions. I'll throw them out both at the same time. First, Deputy City Manager, you mentioned that you have the two middle schools. Last week, you mentioned in addition to the convention center, that might not be enough to house all these migrants. So what is the other location that you all are looking into? Do you have an opening date and a capacity number for that facility? That's the first question. Do you want to address that one first?
Okay, yeah. And so, you know, with the numbers that they're talking about, and they're saying upwards of 35,000 already waiting in Ciudad Juarez to come over, that's where we could see that large surge, that large influx of people all at once. And so you have to couple that with Customs Border Patrol's processing time. So it's not like 35,000 people enter and then released at the same point in time, but we have to be cognizant of that. So our primary operation will be to stand up the schools. We'll stand up one, the other one's on the ready. As we have to stand up that one, we'll go into that one. And if we have to go beyond there, then that's what we'll look at. And the convention center, as we saw in December, could be a possibility. But at this point in time, we want to utilize the school footprints and expand there as much as we can before we move to a third location.
And if there were to be a fourth location, because you did mention that at the commissioners meeting last Thursday, do you have any idea what that location would be as of now?
So in our emergency management plans, and I'll let Chief Rodriguez talk about it, there's multiple locations identified. And so it's just looking at where can we get the largest number of people and what is needed. I mean, we've used hotels before. Hotels are they're easy to handle, and they're very good to do with family units because it gives them that privacy. Single mothers with children, it gives them that privacy that they need, that individual compartmentalization. So that's another avenue. Chief, anything to add?
Yeah, sure. Let me just add to that. As the chief stated, you know, we have our emergency management plans that specific for sheltering. So we have over a dozen identified shelters that we would used for emergencies outside of this migrant situation. But those are going to be dependent, like we stated, how many individuals it can hold. We also want to take into account its location, the logistics wraparound services that we're going to have to be providing. So we have those available, but we're going to be deciding which one's going to be best, depending on where the need is.
Great, thank you so much.
Thanks, Lianna. Iberto?
Thanks, Laura. Good afternoon, everyone. I want to ask you, so once you guys start operating in these different locations, of course, the convention center, the schools, and and the other ones that you were mentioning, Chief Rodriguez, what kind of staff are you guys using for this? Any volunteers? Is it going to be city staff? And if it's city staff, what agencies will they take from? What services, if any, possible?
So we're looking at contracting with third-party providers to provide that sheltering operation part of it. We do have some employees that are hired full-time just to assist emergency management with migrant operations, but they have multiple functions that need to be performed. So as far as sheltering, we're looking at third-party contracts.
And one more question for you, Chief. During today's also city council meeting, you said that you're going to see something based on all the information you received. Well, Mayor Leeser said this, that El Paso hasn't seen before. Can you please explain what you guys mean about this? If it's because of the 35,000 migrants that were reported to be in Juarez, or why is that? Is it because of the numbers?
Yeah, it's the sheer volume and what does it bring. And so we saw last, August, September timeframe, October timeframe. That's when we saw the Venezuelans that were unsponsored. We'd never seen numbers like that all at once. And then we had the December timeframe where it just overcapacitated our airlines, our transportation in and out of the city. And a lot of it was due to the holiday season plus the ice storm that went across the country. And so that had a lot of influx too, but we never saw the transportation, bogged down as we saw it back then. So what he means by that is we're expecting a little bit of all of this, and you couple that with sheer volumes that we haven't seen before.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Heriberto. Mireya?
Hi, Mario. Hi, Chief. And thank you, Laura, for helping coordinate this. The last couple of times that we've been down to El Paso and the city has experienced these surges, there seemed to be a clear concern about how involved the federal government was or wasn't. Can you speak a little bit more to how, there was a talk even, I think, at one point of you guys asking for them to set up a tent facility to potentially hold some of these migrants for longer. It didn't seem like the administration, the feds at that point were willing to get as involved as you guys may have been asking at the time. What is the relationship now? Where are they in all of this conversation? I know you did mention that they are helping obviously with funding. That is a big thing, but where are they also with the planning part of this?
We have not got a final word on where they're at with that. We continue to ask that same, and it's about classifying those that can't be returned, like from Venezuela specifically. There's no return agreement to send them back to the country that they came from. And so with that, we asked them to treat it more like a refugee status. And that's where they've set up the tent cities, the welcome, the processing on the downstream side to assist them get acclimated and to move on to other locations within the country. So we've asked for that. We still continue to ask for that, but we don't have an update on it.
If I can add just one thing to that.
Yes, sir.
We're tracking this, but they did add a soft-sided facility in Northeast El Paso, which helps with their detention space. That went up in mid-January. So there has been some additional capacity increases within the El Paso sector. For your information, if you weren't tracking that.
Thank you, guys.
And we have Andres Gonzalez. Andres, if you could unmute yourself and ask your first follow-up.
Hi, hello. Yes, I'm Andres with MSNBC and NBC News. Thank you so much for doing this. So I just wanted to follow up on something that was mentioned earlier about the transportation of migrants to different cities, and Houston was mentioned. I just wanted to clarify how it has worked, or how you plan for it to work in terms of how migrants will be moved to Houston or from Houston. Can you just clarify what the flow will work, and in terms of busing and flying migrants out of El Paso?
So what the current flow is, the county of El Paso is actually doing the processing. And so they're assisting them and they're helping them secure their travels out of Houston airports. And so what's happening after they secure their travels, that later that evening, they're transported via charter bus to Houston, straight to the airport, I believe, Chief, you can correct me if I'm wrong. And from there, they go ahead and make their connecting flights and move on to their final destination.
Got it. So they're going to Houston as a way to decrease the load in El Paso, in the El Paso airport area.
Yes, and it makes it a lot more.
Fly out of Houston.
Yeah.
Got it. And then my follow-up is, I hear you about the numbers and the different plans that you guys have if the 35,000 come in eventually, however often they do, or in whatever amounts. But are you guys like preparing for, what we saw in December, which, I think you alluded to, which is the amount of families outside sleeping in the street, or the amount of people, at the airport? Is that something that you think will be inevitable given just the amount of people that will come in at the pace that they will come in? And if so, what is the response to those folks that may have to, for whatever amount of time, sleep outside a night or two or a week or however long?
So what we saw in December, and when we saw those people staying out in the streets, is those were the ones that were unprocessed. And so there was inability to bring them into local shelters that are accepting that federal funding. And so that was a difficulty there. Some of the churches do stand up and they do provide housing for them in a safe area of refuge until they can work on all their processing. But with Title 42 going away, we don't know if we're still going to see those kind of numbers that we saw. What we saw in December was people entering in anticipation of Title 42 going away in early January. And so they were they entered early, and they were hoping to wait it out the next week or so and then do their processing so they can move on their way. They just got stuck within that position. So with Title 42 actually being lifted, I don't know if we'll see that same volume, but it is a concern.
Got it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Andres. We do have a question from K-Fox. They're asking if Chief D'Agostino or Chief Rodriguez, if either of you could comment on the state of emergency discussed at the City Council this morning, if you could elaborate on what was discussed and what was brought about, what that'll mean.
I don't believe we discussed this state of a declaration of emergency.
I believe they're asking about items 2 through 5. What do they mean for us?
So what we did this morning is we extended the emergency ordinance. And that's what allows us to do the planning, to do the assistance, to keep all these employees employed so they can continue helping with the migrant efforts. It doesn't actually allow us to do sheltering within a school or a municipal building or a warehouse. That's why at this point under this ordinance, all we can utilize is our personnel to keep helping with the cause. And it also allows us to use our hotels so we can house, if need be, an overflow.
Thank you, Chief. We also have Yvonne Suarez from KVIA. Her mic is not working. She's asking about the conversation with the diocese about using their facility and staff or volunteers to help. Will there be additional security from El Paso police on hand for those?
Is there a specific facility they're referring to?
No, sir. It was simply with El Paso Diocese about using their facility and staff or volunteers to help. Will there be additional security or EPPD on hand?
Now, just like back in December, and this was more of an issue downtown by the Sacred Heart Church, and that's where we did have additional officers doing patrols in that area. We also had some state assistance with DPS. So that's part of the security plan that we a brief council on a couple of weeks back on that security plan, not just to help maintain that order in downtown, but also along the border freeway.
Thank you, Chief. Y Stephanie, para darte la pregunta, no tengo a Enrique hoy, entonces podemos darte la entrevista en español al fin de esta entrevista, ahorita nomás en inglés por el momento, pero les puedo dar la entrevista al fin en español. Next in queue is going to be John Monet. And John, I apologize, I'm butchering your last name.
It's okay, it's Moan. Some people say Monet. Doesn't matter. Yeah, so sorry, I just heard a figure of 35,000 people counted in Juarez. Can you tell me where you got that information from? Did it come from the Mexican federal government, or is that from our federal government? Where did that information come from?
I haven't heard that high from the Mexican government. I've heard different sources. So it depends on who you ask, if the CBP versus state or versus Juarez officials as well. The 35,000 was an earlier number that was reported by, I believe it was some state resources that was their best intel. And then the mayor had mentioned it in talking with Ciudad Juarez that he had got a confirmation of that same number as well.
Okay. And sorry, just one follow-up. I looked in reporting this story when I was in your neck of the woods a couple of weeks ago, and the federal government felt pretty confident that its CBP One app was handling the issue of people wanting to cross at ports of entry in a fairly tidy manner. Do you still think, regardless of that and the confidence it has, that you would still you have to prepare for this potential influx of a big crossing at once?
Most definitely. I mean, we've been seeing for the last couple of weeks, and it's spiked up higher than this, but it's been averaging about 1,000, 1,100, 1,200 a day as far as apprehensions. And so without Title 42, they're not going to be able to return those back. So those are people who aren't following that process right now, is going through the One app. I believe they're limited to the capacity they can do in one day. And so people get anxious and they want to cross in other means. So I would still anticipate a surge of some size.
Thank you.
Heriberto?
Thank you, Laura. Do you guys expect to see migrants released to the streets after May 11 with the possible ending of Title 42?
We would hope not. And we continue to talk to Customs and Border Patrol about that being, they get to a certain point where they cannot house anymore, then that's their only option when everything gets backloaded. But we want to make sure that we're open in advance, that we're ready to start housing, and we got our transportation pieces, all of our contracts in place. So if we have to move people on, we will do that. That, like I said, is the only one who does street releases is Customs and Border Patrol. They tell us it's one of their last resorts, but we ask them not to as much as possible.
And a quick follow-up, if this eventually happens, what's the limit of migrants the city can process a day, Chief?
That varies. So when you look at the different areas, typically with our NGO network shelter, they can receive anywhere between 300 to 500 per day, usually Monday through Friday. That number goes down on the weekends. When you look at the county's Migrant Support Services Center, they moved into a new facility and they may have processing capabilities of up to 1,200 per day. And then outside of that is going to be dependent on the operations that the city will employ via the Welcome Center, our supplemental transportation and emergency sheltering, and all that's going to be dictated by the numbers.
Thank you, Chief.
You're welcome.
Damian?
Hi, everybody. Thank you. Quick question. In your conversations with the feds, have you talked about ICE detention, meaning that part of these migrants that you're expecting in El Paso would be transported to ICE detention centers in the area? And if that's the case, do you know which detention centers, ICE detention centers, would be operating and receiving these adult migrants?
No, I mean, we're not in conversation, but we know that CBP, Border Patrol, and ICE do work hand in hand together to be able to manage that flow. But no, I would refer that question back to our federal partners.
Yeah, that question is best asked by the CBP and ICE folks.
Yeah, I wanted to know if it was on the table, because a big difference now is that adults that would have been released to or deported or removed to Mexico under Title 42, now they will stay in the country. So no reference to that in your conversations.
No, you'd have to have that conversation with ICE or CBP in that respect. Cindy?
Yes, hi. So we have days to May 11th. There seems to be a lot of still unknowns and unanswered questions. What do you hope to accomplish in 2 weeks? And what are some of the lessons learned from the last time that you're going to apply this time around?
The first part of your question was?
We have roughly 15 days to May 11th, and there seems to be a lot of unknowns. What do you hope to accomplish, or what will you accomplish in 2 weeks? And what are the lessons learned from last time? It seems like we have a lot of time to come up with some of these answers here.
Well, it really does if we had the answers. And that's what it is. It's that unknown factor that we don't know about. We talk to our federal partners in Customs and Border Patrol and people at all levels of the federal government, and they don't know what to predict either. And so that's the biggest difficulty we see, is we don't know what's going to actually transpire, how many decompression flights they're going to be able to do, if they're going to be able to maintain that. And so that has a large effect on how we operate here locally. As for us, what we've learned over the last, let's just take the last year, is the different aspects that it brings in, and whether we have to do the welcoming center, which is a lot of processing, providing that basic care, whether it's we have to do the sheltering as we did for several months via the hotels, or open into the larger congregate setting sheltering, such as the schools, or even like we had to do in December at the convention center. And it's all those pieces that are going to go together. That's what we've learned. That's what we've gotten a better sense of how to actually do it, because the team has hands-on experience now. And so that's where we'll be moving into going forward. But that the unknowns are still the unknowns.
Thank you. I wanted to also ask about if you could give us more of a detailed breakdown of the advanced funding that you've received from FEMA and the Emergency Food and Shelter Program. There was a couple of conflicting numbers that I wanted to try to understand a little better, but for calendar year 2023, can you tell us how much has been requested? How much have you received? And are any of those amounts from the latest round of available money?
So our total of what we've asked for this calendar year was 40.2 million. Right now, after we've spent some of it during that first quarter of this calendar year, and so we have to utilize some of that. We still have 14.4 million remaining, and so we're waiting for that last 25.8. So we're 25.8 short of the 40.2. We do have roughly 14.5 million in the bank per se for operations, but we're still waiting on that. FEMA did accept applications. We haven't seen any. We don't know where they're at in the process. So I haven't heard of anyone getting funding yet out of that new tranche of money. So that's what we're waiting on right now.
Pending notice for the 25.8. That's what you applied for in the latest round?
The total we've applied for came out to 40.2, yes.
How much did you apply for in this latest round?
That's that 40.2. So that's subtracting what they've already fronted us. That's what we've asked for. Okay. And some of that money just came outside of a request. So we asked for 20 million, I believe it was back in December we talked about. So we asked for that and we didn't get that, but we got several smaller pots. And so they just keep provided the funding. And so what we did is we told them, looking ahead and planning for the rest of the calendar year, that's where we came up with that 40.2 number.
When did you apply for that 40.2? Was that through different applications?
It was the end of March, I believe, first of April.
And that was from the last round of available money?
No, that was applying for this new current funding stream, right?
Yes.
Okay, we got to go on to the next person. Mireya.
Hi, thank you again for taking the question. Just a really quick follow-up on, we were talking about the possible influx here and the 35,000 potentially in Juarez. Have you guys gotten any sort of sense of why there seems to be, why El Paso seems to be a magnet at this point? Or is this something that other cities along the border, whether in Texas or other states, are also experiencing? Because it does seem like either one, you guys are way over prepared than anybody else in talking about it, or two, you become more of a magnet. And is there any perspective on that?
Yeah, we haven't received any intel specific to some of the other jurisdictions along the border, whether or not they're receiving these high numbers. What is unique to El Paso and has been since last year was primarily with the Valenzuelan populations and those that were impacted by the DHS enforcement action that they put in place that was specific to that nationality. So during that period, El Paso was receiving almost 95% of all the Venezuelan, and that's predominantly the largest population that we're seeing in Juarez. And we don't know if all of that number of 35,000 is primarily made up of Venezuelan population that's been in the area. So that may be the distinction, but we'll continue to seek out additional information to see if some of the other border cities are seeing the same.
And if I could just add one little thing to that, we keep talking about this potential of 35,000 in Juarez. I mean, those are truly unconfirmed numbers. I mean, that's what we're hearing from Intel. But the concerning thing is we're hearing that there's 300 to 400 coming via freight train daily, just freight train entry daily into Ciudad Juarez. And so that number, whatever it is, it continues to grow, and there's more people coming in on the daily, and that's where we're going to see that long-term surge that we're anticipating.
Thank you. Heriberto?
Thank you again, Laura. The residents in the lower valley and in Segundo Barrio, guys, you know that, were concerned during last year's surge as they won't find undocumented migrants hiding in their property, running through it on the Border Express Highway, of course. What provisions are you making for that? Should it happen again? Of course, now that we're expecting more numbers after May 11th.
So as we talked about, the governor's operation and the Texas military along the border, they have secured a lot of that area. So we're not seeing that same traffic of people coming through the neighborhood right there. That coupled with, we did ask for, and they're still here locally, we asked for some law enforcement support. And so DPS agents are now assigned here in El Paso, and they've committed to also helping to patrol that area along with PD. And it's not looking for anything else. It's to prevent those accidents, people from running across the street right there and creating accidents or getting killed doing so.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you, guys. In looking at some of the questions on the chat, there are some questions on the chat. John, you asked about the FEMA grants, and Chief Rodriguez provided the funding there below in the grant in the table there.
And Laura, what's not included in that table is the amount that we requested, and it was roughly 25.8.
Correct. So that's the funding that remains to be added. And then there's also a question from Morgan Lee. Have the CBP or CBP indicated what their processing capacity will be per day, even roughly? Are you planning any messaging directly to migrants? What do you want them to know? And I think this is a question either for you, Chief D'Agostino or yourself, Chief Rodriguez.
I think we can refer to that one to CPP directly, but how many individuals CPP and Border Patrol are going to be able to process will also be a big factor, right, on the numbers that we'll be seeing here locally. If, although there may be this large amount of people waiting in Juarez, if they choose to follow that process, then that brings a little bit more order to the releases into the community. So that can be a big factor on how this will play out.
CB, Customs and Border Patrol is looking at doing a media event coming up soon to have this discussion with the public as well.
So y'all could stay looped in on that respect. Okay. I don't see any other hands raised or any other comments on the chat on our end. Oh wait, Didi Martinez does say, is there any sense of what is being done to address migrant population that claims that they are financially unable to leave El Paso without assistance? Shelter sources say that they're increasingly seeing migrants seeking for those who can foot the whole bill. And I don't know that we would be able to answer that question. I don't think it's a question we would be able to answer.
But providing transportation is a last resort. So it's not our primary. We're not here to buy seats for people. We want them to do it. We're just going to help them facilitate their travels through. So whether that's emergency sheltering, transportation to the airport or bus terminal, or even if it has to come in a longer transportation to another transportation hub, from there they can get their own travels onward.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
All right. And so we're going to go ahead and close out this this opportunity. We do have we do have one more hand raised. City, go ahead.
Thank you. I just wanted to piggyback on that last comment by Chief D'Agostino. Does that mean that the city will not be doing any long distance transportation, or will that depend on the situation, or are you ruling it out completely at this point?
We are not ruling it out. As I talked about earlier, that is definitely in our arsenal, and we might have to use it. It just depends on what the situation dictates at the moment.
Thank you for that clarification.
Thank you. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and close out this media availability. I can make myself available for those of you who need Spanish. I'll be happy to do Spanish interviews. And I apologize, unfortunately, our lovely Enrique Dueñas was not available this afternoon to do the Spanish translation.
Laura, this is all reportable?
Excuse me?
This call was all reportable?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Stephanie, ¿necesitas la traducción? ¿Alguien en español?
Sí, Laura, por favor.
Sí, ok.
Dame un segundo para empezar a grabar.